Hello and welcome back to this episode of the Engage A podcast. I am Josh with my co-host Mike. Today we are going to be doing an entire breakdown of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about the 16 teams in the Sweet 16 and how they got there and how their path looks going forward. But before we get into that, we got a couple NFL headlines. I will start us off here with Stephon Diggs going to the Patriots, signed a 3-year, $69 million deal, I believe, 23 a year to go to New England to be Drake May's wide receiver one. We talked a lot in the offseason about the Patriots needing to get wide receiver help for Drake May. It was a big reason why he couldn't fully break out this past season. But now they have their guy here in Stephon Diggs. He is coming off an ACL injury, but hopefully he will be able to recover from that and be great for Drake May. They didn't sign anybody in free agency leading up to him, and there wasn't really many wide receivers available. So we kind of assumed, okay, it looks like it's going to be another draft year for the Pats, and hopefully they don't have another Jalen Polk situation where they completely miss on a draft pick with a wide receiver. But now they don't have to worry about that as much. They can maybe try to draft a wide receiver two or three, but they have their number one guy, and they have Stephon Diggs. Hopefully he can be healthy and be a great weapon for Drake May going forward.
Yes, hopefully Diggs can be a great weapon going forward. We had talked all offseason about how they needed to get a receiver for Drake May. They really just needed to get him weapons overall. He didn't have any weapons last season to work with, so they go out and get Stephon Diggs. He is coming off a torn ACL, so that is concerning. But in his career, he's been a good receiver. He's helped out the quarterbacks that he's been with, especially the young ones. We saw it with Josh Allen. So hopefully he can be a great weapon for Drake May and help take Drake May to the next level.
Okay, and then the only other one from this past week, it's been a pretty quiet week up until yesterday when, as we're recording this on Wednesday, we had a couple moves on Tuesday night. Well, I guess we also have Jameis that we haven't talked about, but this one goes a little bit coupled with Jameis. Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston both signed with the New York Giants. It looked like it was going to be Jameis's job. He got signed first a few days ago, and it looked like we were finally going to see Jameis start a full season or at least start a little bit with the Giants until their rookie came in. And then we get the shock on Tuesday night that Russell Wilson signs with the Giants, and this is a domino effect, I believe. One, it sucks. We'll start with Jameis. It sucks for Jameis. He's not going to get to start. He's going to be a backup once again. There's probably going to be a rookie in there, so probably never going to see Jameis play in this offense, unfortunately, unless Russ gets hurt early on in the season. But as far as Russ goes, him signing with the Giants means he's saying goodbye to Pittsburgh, and it means Pittsburgh is down to their final two options, and Rudolph and Rodgers. And the rumors we're getting a little bit away from Rodgers over the past couple weeks, but what I've seen in the past few days, I think it might be Rodgers again. Maybe that's because the Vikings don't want Rodgers and he's going to end up just having to go to the Steelers just to have a job where he starts. But it's looking like the Steelers are going to go with Rodgers now, which is good, which leaves the Vikings with JJ McCarthy. I think everybody's happy with that scenario. The nightmare scenario for this little trio of teams and quarterbacks here is if Aaron Rodgers does go to the Vikings and the Steelers do get stuck with Mason Rudolph, which is still a possibility, but Steelers need to be fully focused on Aaron Rodgers now.
They absolutely have to be fully focused on Aaron Rodgers. It has looked it's just weird overall for this quarterback position with the Steelers. You obviously can go in there now and have two great weapons. It's also just weird in the fact that Mason Rudolph was really even an option. I can't really understand that at all. So it's going to hopefully be Aaron Rodgers for the Steelers, although he has had issues. It's going to be interesting to see him and Tomlin together with the offense, but they need to go out and get Rodgers now and get a real quarterback in there for those weapons.
Okay, that's about all we got now for this NFL news cycle here. We can move on to March Madness as I pull up my window here. We will start in the what is this? The South region, I believe, here with
Yes.
Auburn as our first Sweet 16 team to talk about here. Auburn struggled in the first half against Alabama State in the first weekend. Had a little bit of maybe jitters coming off of losing 3 of 4 in the SEC tournament and late in the SEC season. They end up being fine in that game. They take care of business with Alabama State, win that game by 20, move on to play Creighton, who beat Louisville in the first round, stomped Louisville in Lexington. And Creighton hung in that game for the most part, but Auburn was consistently in the lead for most of that game, and they pulled away late. They end up winning by double digits. Auburn, I said going into the tournament, I still feel like they're one of the most underrated teams in college basketball, or underrated teams in college basketball. Given or underrated is a bad a bad sense because they're the number one overall seed, but they're one of the most overlooked teams right now in the tournament. And this is with Janai Broom not playing too well. They won their first two games. Janai Broom hasn't played well for the past couple weeks. He needs to play a lot better, especially against Michigan when you're going against two 7-footers. We'll talk about that matchup here when we talk about Michigan in a second. But Chennai Broom needs to play better, but Auburn, regardless, moves on, and they got a tough matchup against Michigan next week or this week.
Yeah, they do have a tough matchup. They did move on. The games really weren't too scary for them. They did struggle a little bit in that first matchup against Alabama State. Alabama State stayed in the game in the first half. In the second half, Auburn got going, took over that game, won it very easily. And then in the second round, Creighton's a very tough matchup for anybody. They really dominated that game against Louisville, the first game of the tournament, that 8-9 game. Louisville really wasn't in the game at all, just defensively could not guard Creighton, and Kalkbrenner is a fantastic defensive weapon. They struggled to score. Creighton looked very good going into that Auburn game, and Auburn took care of business. They covered. They had a dominant lead for most of the second half, 10 plus. So great win for Auburn. I think they looked very good so far, considering they've had that very tough matchup in Creighton, which was one of the better 9 seeds in the entire bracket. So nice win, and I think they've looked solid so far.
Okay, moving on here with the Michigan Wolverines, who have won 5 straight games. Dusty May said going into the Big Ten tournament, he said we needed a break. We needed some time off. They got about, I believe, 8 days off between their last regular season game and that first game of the Big Ten tournament for them. And now they've rattled off 5 straight wins. They won the Big Ten. They have won their first 2 games here in the NCAA tournament. They beat Texas A&M, a very good team. They out rebounded Texas A&M. 2 7-footers is going to help you there. Golden's been fantastic. Of course, Wolf's been fantastic as well. Guard play's been really solid for them. They've been shooting it very well. They had many, many times during the season where they struggled with turning the ball over and they struggled with shooting, and they've been able to really keep that in check over the past few games here as they defeat UC San Diego, who was a team that a lot of people predicted to upset them in the first round. They were winning for the entirety of that game. UC San Diego made it close at the end, but for the most part, Michigan wasn't in control for a good portion of that game, and then they go into the A&M game where they're down 10 in the second half, and they go on like a 30-12 run to win that game against a great A&M team to match up here with Alabama or with Auburn, I should say. And like I said earlier, I think this is a kind of a tough matchup for Auburn. Auburn has a good amount of size down low, but Michigan has bigger size down low. And I think if Michigan can control the boards and not turn the ball over, they're going to be in a good spot for this game. And I was looking at the matchups for next week, and out of all the money line dogs, I think Michigan is my fourth favorite of the money line dogs to pull off the upset this week.
Yeah, pause. But the two 7-footers for Michigan, Vlad Gold and Danny Wolf, have been dominant so far in this tournament. That's been the big matchup when they're both out of foul trouble. They are just, and both on the court, they're such a better defensive team. They've had guys step up in this tournament and hit shots. Roddy Gale, who struggled pretty much all season. People thought he was a double agent for Ohio State for most of the season, got so much hate. Came out in that game against Texas A&M and had his best game of the season. He was fantastic in that game. Texas A&M started out great. They were up 10. I'm pretty sure they were still up 10 in the second half. They looked like they were on their way to win and move on, but Michigan, like we've seen them do a lot this year in the second half, come back, take the lead, and really never give it back. They did almost choke at the end against UC San Diego. The refs had a missed a lot of calls late in the game for both teams. Vlad Golan was fouled hard late in the game. They didn't call it. Cheddar stepped out of bounds and then proceeded. I think they hit a three. They didn't call that one. UC San Diego had a guy get fouled going to the rim, didn't call it. So the refs were strange in that one, but Michigan was able to hang on after UC San Diego took the lead with about 2 minutes left. Trey Donaldson, he's had a great tournament and a phenomenal Big Ten tournament. He's been on fire for Michigan. So they move on to this game with Auburn, where I think they definitely have a chance to win. If they do win, they're going to need Roddy Kell to continue to step up, Trey Donaldson to continue to step up. They're going to need those guys to be great on top of Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, obviously continuing to be the two best players for Michigan. So they have a chance to go and beat Auburn, but we'll see.
Okay, moving down a little bit in this bracket with Ole Miss, who is arguably the hottest team in college basketball right now. They're playing so well. They only won by 7 against UNC, but if you watch that game, they beat the brakes off UNC. UNC never had a chance in that game. Ole Miss came out of the gate and just dominated them. And then they move on to an ISU team who's been, I know they're banged up, but they're one of the best defensive teams in college basketball, and they laid 91 on ISU. When this Ole Miss offense is rolling, they're a tough team to stop because they're scrappy defensively. They have good size, and of course, we know how good they are offensively. They just need their shots to fall, and they did fall in those first 2 games against ISU. Now they're matching up against a Michigan State team who can stop you from shooting as well as they've been shooting. So Michigan State, of course, has to do that. But Michigan State hasn't looked too flashy in their first 2 games, and Ole Miss is coming off of 2 dominant wins. So I actually have Ole Miss as my second favorite money line dog to pull off the upset this week. But we'll talk about Michigan State in a second.
Yeah, Ole Miss goes out there, beats North Carolina. They had a very big lead going into that second half and looked very good in those games. They've looked great so far in this tournament. They're a very small team. They've been able to use that to their advantage. They don't turn the ball over, which is something that is very good. Padula has hit shots. He hit against North Carolina to pretty much put that game away. He's been great. They beat ISU, who just injuries have really hurt this team. They've been inconsistent at points this season, and they got in this game against Ole Miss and really just got beat from the start. Ole Miss dominated that pretty much entire game. They're very good defensively, but like I said, they're a very small team. Michigan State's going to have advantages, but Mississippi also has advantages in that game, so we'll see.
Okay, two Michigan State here. They do come out with two 8+ point wins in this tournament. They end up getting a 25-point win in the first round after really struggling in that first half, I believe. Were they losing in the first half or only up by a couple points at the end of the first half?
They were losing 5-0 to start the game.
I know like they were losing it in the first half. I mean to end the first half. I can't
No,
remember.
we were winning going into halftime.
Was it close though? I feel like I remember it being pretty
I think Michigan
close.
State was up 6 at half.
33-28 at halftime of that game. So I mean, Michigan State had a phenomenal second half, but they were struggling early in that game. Bryant's size was a lot for them, but they ended up overcoming it, and that was a big time win for them to avoid being the only top four team to get upset in the first round. Then they move on to New Mexico, where they really struggled in the first half of that game until about the 8-minute mark in the first half when they realized, okay, I know we're down, but we have to just stop shooting. It's just not the way we play Michigan State ball. They drove to the rim a ton. They got fouled a ton, and that was just how they came back in that game. They knew that they had to play their game no matter how far they were down. It's similar to a team that is a running team in football, and you want to run the ball and you get down, and sometimes you force yourself into passing situations, and that's when you go south. But if you still have time on the clock, and Michigan State had a ton of time on the clock, they could play their game. They didn't have to force anything in the last 28-ish minutes of that game, and they were able to come back and beat New Mexico by 8 points, setting up this matchup with Ole Miss, where very different stylistic matchup between these two teams. Styles make fights. I think it'll be very interesting. Michigan State has to come out hot in one of these games. These slow starts are not going to be able to work for them as they get deeper in this tournament. You play against better teams. You can have slow starts against Bryant. You can have slow starts against New Mexico. Once you start playing teams like Ole Miss and Auburn and potentially Florida or Maryland in the second round or Texas or in the Final Four or Texas Tech, you cannot come out to these slow starts. You cannot go down 10-0 to these games. And I don't think they will. I think Izzo will have these guys going, and I'm sure he's ripping into them for how this tournament started so far for them.
Yeah, they had slow starts in Bryant against Bryant. Michigan State did. They had slow starts in New Mexico, and the more I think about it, though, that's just what this Michigan State team is. We've seen it in almost every game this season. They get out to slow starts. I mean, their run where they won 8 straight games against all quad one games, they were down in the first half, and pretty much all of those games came out, and Michigan State dominates the last 5 minutes of the first half, and then comes out of the second half and dominates the entire second half. They've done it all season. It's not surprising when it happens. This is a team that uses their depth to their advantage. They kind of just take some punches like a boxer. They take some punches early in the fight. They figure you out, and then they go out and just beat the crap out of you for the rest of the 60 minutes, 50 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I guess, that they have left. So we've seen it all season. They dominated Bryan in that second half. It wasn't a game. And then New Mexico, it was close all game. They still covered, though. New Mexico beat Marquette. Just a very disappointing season for that Marquette team with all the talent they had. Cam Jones, Stevie Mitchell. They had a lot of talent on that team. Just unfortunate for them to get nothing done in this tournament. Shaka Smart's got to get back to the Sweet 16 at some point. But Michigan State, New Mexico, Donovan Dent really wasn't a factor in this game. Jaden Akins defensively shut him down. They got Junior Joseph into foul trouble, and they went on, won the game. So Michigan State, Mississippi, they do have to get off to a better start. You don't want to be playing from the behind all game, but that's just what this team is. They use their depth, and like I said, Mississippi likes to play very small. Teams haven't really even considered that against Michigan State because they will just out rebound you to death. So we'll see how it goes. If Mississippi can rebound, they're going to force Michigan State to go small probably, but if Michigan State can get those rebounds, we'll see.
Yeah, I do want to say a couple things on that New Mexico Marquette game. Shaka Smart, I believe, has lost now seven since going to the Final Four with VCU, has lost 7 times to seeds 3 or worse than him, and 5 times to seeds 7 or worse than him since then. So He's had significant problems losing to teams significantly lower seeded than them. And then New Mexico, Donovan Dent enters the portal. So we'll see where he goes. Hopefully he ends up at a big time Power Five school and can dominate, or maybe he follows Richard Pitino to Xavier.
I bet he follows him to Xavier.
We'll see. He doesn't have a no contact, so we'll
Oh,
see. We'll
that's
see
good.
what he ends up doing in the portal. But moving down to the West region, the Florida Gators, they roll past Norfolk State in the first round, and then they have arguably the best game of the tournament against Connecticut in the second round. UConn led for a lot of this game, even in the second half, led for a lot of this game. But my take on this game is that this was exactly what Florida needed. They needed to have a game where they were tested physically, where they didn't make a ton of shots for most of the game, and we needed to see if they could overcome that. And late in this game, they finally got hot in the last 4 or 5 minutes shooting the ball. Walter Clayton just took over the game in the last few minutes, and they were able to come back and beat the defending champs in UConn. They've been rolling for the past few months here. Like they've been rolling for about 2 months, just consistent, beating the shit out of teams, winning against good teams. And they finally got tested here against Connecticut, a chance where it looked like at points in this game it was over for them, and UConn was going to move on and continue the magic. But they hold on, they win this game, and I think they're battle tested now, and I think that helps them even more going forward in this Maryland game.
Yeah, they are battle tested now. That game against UConn was a very close game. UConn pushed them to their limits. Walter Clayton had to hit shots to win that game, and he did. UConn versus Oklahoma was one of the better games of round one. Jeremiah Fears in Oklahoma. They really gave UConn a fight. That was a very good game to watch as well, but they got that done, and Florida UConn was great. Both teams were good. Dan Hurley has to embarrass himself after the game in multiple ways. Heard some interesting things that I don't know if are true or not, but
I don't think they are.
he, you don't think they are?
I think
This
they're all fake.
stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, still, even the videos of him walking to the locker room were embarrassing.
So funny. That's
Just blame the
so
refs
funny.
completely.
Hope they
At
don't
some
fuck
point,
you like they fucked us.
yeah, at some point you have to take accountability as a head coach and just not every loss you get just look and point fingers and blame people for losing. It's kind of embarrassing. That's pretty much what he did all Maui tournament, and now he does that all NCAA tournament. So kind of embarrassing for him there, but nice for Florida to get that win and go on to the Sweet 16.
You got to have guys like him. You got to. It's what the
Yeah, but at
sport was
some
built
point
on.
you gotta just take accountability once for losing. Just one time out of the 11 times you lost this year.
Hey, the refs. Hey, he didn't want the refs to fuck Baylor like they fucked him.
It's strange.
I mean, if I guess he's a coach, so maybe you want him to take responsibility. But we do this. We do the same shit as fans. It's passion, man.
I've seen UConn fans be less pissed about the refs than Dan Hurley. Way less.
Yeah, I like the
At some
passion
point you
though.
gotta
I
play defense. I
I
mean
agree.
there's a difference between passion and just deflection.
I guess, but would you rather see him just do coach speak after the game and just be like, "Yeah, good
Yeah.
season. We played hard." I'd rather see him just be unfiltered and be honest. I hate the bullshit after the games where
The
they just don't
refs
say what they
didn't
actually
screw him
do.
though, in my opinion. I'm pretty sure they
I agree. No, I agree,
not
but
even close. I didn't even see one moment where I thought the refs made a wrong call.
I know.
I
I
thought the
mean,
refs actually were helping UConn for most of the time.
I don't know if I'd say they were helping UConn, but I mean, I agree. I don't think they got fucked by the refs. I don't think they lost because of the refs, but I don't know. I like to see the passion once in a while. We don't have that in college basketball right now.
I would disagree. I think there's still passion.
Yeah,
Easily still passion.
I don't know. I think it's what makes the sport interesting. It gives people somebody to hate and somebody for us to talk about on here. But we have Maryland now. Moving on to the Sweet 16, they beat Grand Canyon, beat the brakes off Grand Canyon in the first round. Completely forgot Grand Canyon was even in the tournament at this point. And then they go and they play Colorado State in the second round. A Colorado State team who was favored against Memphis as a 12-5. And then they move on to beat Memphis by 1 point in the game. They probably should have won by more. They shot it very well in that game at points. And then they play Maryland in the second round. Or how much did Colorado State win by? I actually don't even have it. But they play Maryland in the second round. And that was a game where they led early and they punched Maryland in the mouth out of the gate. Maryland slowly came back, led late in the second half. Colorado State comes back into it and they hit a big time three to take the lead by two or by one with, I believe, 3 seconds left in that game. Maryland, they ask in the huddle, who do you want to take the shot? Derek Queen says, give me the ball. I want the shot. He gets the ball, drives to the rim off the glass, left handed, wins the game at the buzzer. And we are sitting here at this point of March Madness where the entire talking point from everybody in the media, everybody online is this tournament sucks. There's no upsets, there's no drama, and to an extent that is true. We've had, I believe, only like 5 games decided by 5 points or less, or something like crazy like that. Has not been a ton of close games. All the top 4 seeds advance, but we finally had the drama. We finally had a buzzer beater with Derek Queen, and all everyone wants to fucking talk about is, oh, we traveled, oh, we traveled, oh, we traveled. They don't call that in basketball anymore. They don't call it in the NBA, and they rarely call it in college basketball in 3 steps. They'll call you if you shuffle your feet. They'll call you if you pump fake and step before you dribble. But they don't call that third step often, and it was a gather step. It wasn't a full on 1, 2, 3. It was like a half 1, 2 is what it was. And everyone wants to talk about how this is the travel and Colorado State got screwed. The only people that are allowed to be mad at this, in my opinion, are Colorado State fans and Colorado State bettors. Everybody else, pick a side. Either you want the drama or you don't. Because this was the drama. We got it. We got a buzzer beater, our first buzzer beater since 2019 Loyola against Miami. We finally got it. I'm not upset about the travel at all. I think it's one of those things that never, ever, ever gets called. And if the refs did call it and it ended up not being a travel, it's not a reversible call. So either you want a chance to have one of the worst calls in the history of March Madness because they call a travel on a shot that wasn't a travel, or you have this, and I'd much rather have this. Sucks for Colorado State, but it is what it is.
Yeah, never in my mind did I even think that was a travel. I mean, you could if you're gonna call that travel, you can call that on any breakaway dunk and pretty much college basketball.
Exactly.
Just wasn't never even in my mind considered as a travel until I go on and listen to Jalen Rose talk or go on Twitter and scroll through and everyone's asking the question on did he travel or not. I didn't even think it was close. 72-71 win here for Maryland. It was a great game. I can't believe people are even complaining about that. Uh, Maryland wins it though. Derek Queen makes the big play for Maryland to finally push them over the hump there. Memphis versus Colorado State was a good game as well. Colorado State's been on fire. They've been one of the top 10 teams in KenPom since like mid-February, and they showed it hanging tough with a Maryland team that is very good. I think one of the better teams in the tournament left. Maryland dominated Grand Canyon, which if Grand Canyon played any other 4 seed, it would have possibly been a popular upset pick in my opinion. But Maryland, I think, is just better than the rest of the 4 seeds. They got that done very easily, and then that game against Colorado State was a classic and sets up a great game with Florida Maryland, maybe the best game of the Sweet 16 all around. So, yeah, that wasn't a travel.
Yeah, I agree. And we move on now to bottom of this bracket with the Texas Tech Red Raiders beating UNCW by 10, a game they should have won by a lot more, but they just let UNCW hang in there. Then they play Drake in the next round, a Drake team who pulled off the upset against Missouri, a big time upset that I guess that one doesn't count for people, and Colorado State doesn't count because they were favored, and McNeese doesn't count because they lost in the next round. But I guess we haven't had any upsets for some reason. We had 3 double-digit seeds in the round of 32 and one in the Sweet 16. But they beat Drake by 13. They handled this Drake team, a Drake team that's been giving teams trouble all year, one of the hottest teams in college basketball the entire year, only lost 4 games this season. And Texas Tech handled them very well. JT Toppin's been great in this tournament so far. They win this game by 13. They move on to play against an Arkansas team that we will talk about here coming up soon. But I love what we've seen from Texas Tech. I think they're a popular team to have a run to the Final Four. And I think this is a very, very wide open region here in the West where I could see. I don't think Arkansas will get to the Final Four, but I think at least Maryland, Texas Tech, and Florida all have good chances to get to the Final Four.
Yeah, I think all four have a chance to get to the Final Four. Drake knocks off Missouri in an upset. I should have listened to the Missouri hate more. I trusted Missouri to get it done. I liked how many scores they had at all times on the floor. They couldn't get it done. Drake Bennett Sturts was fantastic, as Ben McCollum and Bennett Sturts both transferred to Iowa. Or I guess Ben McCollum doesn't transfer to Iowa. He just is now the head coach at Iowa. But Drake had a great season, 31, finished 31-3 after that big win over Missouri. And I was worried about Texas Tech a little bit. I thought they might fall in an upset against Missouri, but obviously they go and play Drake, and they dominated that game. It really wasn't close. And UNCW, I thought they were a good team, and they gave Texas Tech a solid fight, but Texas Tech is still dominant. JT Toppin was great, like you said. Their defense has been good. They haven't turned it over very much at all this season. I don't think they've turned it over more than 10 times in more than a month in a game. So they've been on fire, and I can see them making the Final Four, but all four of these teams, I think, can go hot next weekend and get on a run and find their way in San Antonio.
And we'll finish off this reason with Arkansas and John Calipari getting it done, beating Bill Self, legendary coach at Kansas, beating Rick Pitino, legendary coach now at St. John's. And the Razorbacks are hot, man. They're playing really good ball right now. Boogie Flan's back. He came back and didn't kill this rhythm like some people thought he would. He didn't play a ton in the Kansas game, but he did play a ton in the St. John's game, and he was phenomenal. We see in the St. John's game, these teams shoot a combined 4 for 41 from three, which was a big time concern for St. John's going into the tournament is do they have the shooting to win this tournament? If they have a game where they go ice cold from three, are they going to be able to recover and win this game? RJ Luis was very, very bad in this game. 3 for 17 shooting, gets benched for the final 5 minutes of this game. A lot of people are talking about Rick Pitino and should Rick Pitino have let him play? That's just not how Rick Pitino coaches. He's never been like that. He is an old school coach that if you're not playing well or you do something to piss him off, he's gonna sit you and he doesn't care if you're the player of the year or if you're the worst player on the team. He's going to keep his strategy regardless, and I do respect that out of him. Maybe they could have used the shot late from him if he could finally get one to fall, but you got to play the averages game, and he was just not shooting the ball well at all. And you have this Arkansas team who Brazil is playing so well for them. Joseph Adu's playing so well for them. Boogie Fland is back and playing well. DJ Wagner's been solid finishing at the rim. And now they get a Duke the Arrow back for this Texas Tech game. He hasn't played since late February. He's one of those guys that he's not a is this guy going to fit in rhythm wise? Is he going to screw up the rhythm we have going? Boogie Fland is one of those guys. He's ball dominant. He's a point guard. He ended up it ended up working out for them. He didn't mess up their rhythm at all. Adu's not a fit out guy. He's a fit in guy. He does things that just do not show up on the stat sheet. He's a great rebounder. He's a great finisher at the rim. He's an aggressive player. He's a solid defender. He's one of those guys that he can only provide positives to your offense and defense. And you definitely don't need to worry about rhythm with him. I think it's going to be great for them that he's going to be back. And he does average 15 points per game on top of all the other stuff he does that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. They play a Texas Tech team with a lot of good length. JT Toppin, of course, has been phenomenal for them. I do like Tech to win this game and kill the run for Arkansas, but I'm rooting for Cal. I don't want them to win the whole thing as it would look bad for the Cats, but I'm rooting for Cal, and it's very impressive to see what he's done here, especially given an 0-5 start in the SEC, and maybe that tells you how good the SEC's been.
Yes, Arkansas, they first they beat Kansas. Bill Self was a close game, but Arkansas got it done, sent Hunter Dickinson into retirement, hopefully. St. John's versus Omaha. St. John's got that one done very easily, and they set up Arkansas versus St. John's, where the concern for St. John's going into this tournament was if they just can't hit a shot if they get behind, they really can't shoot their way back into the game. They're not a good shooting team. And they couldn't 2 for 22 from three. Just did not have it. Luis had his worst game of the season, and they just could not recover from all those things. And Arkansas was able to beat them in this game. The haters were completely right about St. John's. The shooting was going to end them, and it did in this scenario. Their defense was still good in this game, but they just could not shoot their way back in the game from behind. They tried, got back into it. It was close late, but Arkansas had too much, and Rick Pitino unfortunately got sent home, and Arkansas is on their way to the Sweet 16. St. John's was compared to Michigan State in terms of they're both teams that can shoot threes and play good defense, or can't shoot threes, but play good defense. The difference is I think Michigan State, for one, has better shooters, and two, Michigan State can just adapt to the game better than St. John's can. Michigan State can play multiple styles. St. John's really wants you to play their style. They're more defensive oriented, and I should have mentioned for Michigan State, Jace Richardson had his worst game of the season by far. Didn't have a field goal until the last minute of the game, and they still managed to win. So that's big. But St. John's, their best player had his worst game of the season. They decided to bench him late, then it didn't work out, and they find themselves out of the tournament. So Texas Tech Arkansas should be a good matchup.
Okay, we'll move to the right side of the bracket. We'll start with the Duke Blue Devils, who have rolled to this point. There's not much to say about what Duke's done. They beat the absolute shit out of Mount St. Mary's in the first round, 93-49, and then beat the shit out of Baylor, 89-66. Maybe the refs did fuck Baylor like they fucked Dan Hurley in that game, but Duke beat the absolute shit out of both these teams. They matched themselves up against Arizona here with a healthy Cooper Flag, who has been great in these first two games. They beat Arizona earlier on in the season in November. They beat them by 14 in Tucson. Who knows how high we value these games? So I think Arizona's playing a lot better than they did then. I think Duke is also playing a lot better than they were playing in November. So we'll see how this develops. We get the rematch of Caleb Love versus Duke. Caleb Love's been great against Duke. He's been great in this tournament so far, as we'll talk about Arizona here in a bit, but I'm very, very excited for that game.
Yeah, I'm very excited for Arizona Duke as well. Obviously, there's the big storyline with Caleb Love, but so far to this point, Duke has dominated. There's really not much to say. They've beat both teams very easily. They beat Jeremy Roach, their old teammate, very easily. VJ Edgecombe was great in that game against Mississippi State. The Baylor team played very good there. Got a close win against them, but Duke has been just too much to handle for any team so far. So hopefully we'll get a good game with Arizona, but we'll have to see. This Duke team, three top 10 picks probably. They've been dominant so far.
Okay, moving on here to Arizona then. They beat the shit out of Akron in the first round. A lot of people were talking about Akron as a really good team going into this tournament, but once they saw them get matched up with Arizona, Arizona's a tough matchup for Akron because they're very similar to Akron. They score a ton of points. They have good wing defenders. They go and they play Oregon in the second round. We got a old school Pac-12 after dark game here. I know Bill Walton was probably looking down at this game, happy to see it happen. And the big story of this game for me, as of course Dana Altman goes out here in the second round, but is the foul up three. This was the classic foul up three, don't let a team come back in. It sucks for us fans. Maybe there's a potential rule change, but I don't know how you rule change around the foul up three. It's one of those things that if you change that, then do you change the intentionally fouling if you're down? It's a very gray area situation, and people have found a way to game it. And it's a great move if you're the team that does the fouling. I think foul up three is one of those things that you have to do. I know some teams don't do it. I think was it Houston that didn't do it against Gonzaga or something like that. There was other teams that haven't done it in this tournament, but Arizona doubles down. They do it for the entire end of this game. And of course, they win by 4 points. They get the job done against Oregon. Sucks for Oregon. Sucks for fans who wanted to see this game come down to a buzzer beater. But if you're an Arizona fan, you're completely happy with the strategy. And I think most fans in that situation want their team fouling up three.
Yeah, definitely. You want to foul up three in that scenario. Unfortunately, it does suck for the fans. I think the only maybe fix is that if there's anywhere close to a shooting motion, you kind of got to call it a shooting foul because you get that if it's in the middle of the game and you're shooting a jump shot. But in this scenario, college basketball just loves to call everything on the ground. First round for both of these teams, dominant. Oregon beat the crap out of Liberty. Arizona dominated Akron, not really close at all. Setting up a big matchup, Oregon, Arizona. I thought Oregon would find a way to get it done with Dana Altman. He's fantastic in March, but Arizona, they live by the three sometimes and die by Caleb Love's three, and he was on fire in this game, won them the game. He can do that in March. He can also go cold and completely lose you games in March. So we'll see what Caleb Love we get against Duke, but in this game, he was on fire and sent Oregon packing.
Okay, moving down in this region, we have the BYU Cougars who are playing phenomenal basketball right now. Their offense is moving at a crazy pace. They were able to beat VCU in the first round, 80 to 71. There's a VCU team that's very, very good defensively, and BYU just shot the lights out. Saunders is playing like one of the most confident guards in this tournament right now. He's one of those guys that if he's not playing against your team, you love him. If he's playing against your team, you hate him because he's just so, so talented and he's a phenomenal shooter. They move on to play the Wisconsin Badgers in the second round, a game where BYU dominated for the entirety of the game leading up into the last 5 minutes, where Wisconsin came back and made it a close game. John Tonji had 37, I think, in this game or something. He was completely dominant, but still Wisconsin just could not guard. They could not defend this BYU team. Their offense moves so great. KY, Kevin Young, has done a phenomenal job with this team in year one. And it sets up a matchup with Bama where it's two really, really solid offensive teams, two teams that aren't the best defensively, but BYU shooting a lot better than Alabama right now. So I think this is a very, very interesting matchup.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting matchup. BYU, every time I watch them, I feel like they're just like the best team to ever play. Um, but I haven't watched them all season, so I thought, the games that I haven't watched, they have issues. They can turn the ball over a lot. But in this tournament so far, they've looked fantastic. VCU, they beat them. That was one of the better 11 seeds in the tournament. They went out, dominated that game against VCU, and then they beat this Wisconsin team, which had been on fire kind of leading into this tournament, lost that Big Ten championship in a very close game. But BYU's on fire. close win against Wisconsin. They had the lead for most of the game. Wisconsin worked their way back into it. Free throws, Wisconsin had an advantage in as well, but BYU's a very good team, and I like them to beat Alabama, honestly, and go to the Elite Eight. They're on fire. And like you said, Saunders has been fantastic. They can shoot the lights out. They got great big men. They're a very good team, and they're going to be very, very good continuing to move forward.
Okay, moving on to the Alabama Crimson Tide, who have had a pretty shaky start to the tournament here. Robert Morris hung in that game with them for the entirety of the game. Bama pulled away late, won by 9, but Robert Morris gave them a ton of trouble. Mark Sears is not playing well. He's not getting all the foul calls he gets in the SEC, which we talked about as a potential problem for the SEC in these past tournaments is of the amount of foul calls that are called in the regular season. They just don't get called here when you get to March Madness and guys like Mark Bates. Yeah, I mean he is Mark Bates. Bates fouls, but Mark Sears, he's a foul baiter, and that just doesn't play in this tournament very well. They play St. Mary's in the second round, and this was a game Bama should have won by 100. St. Mary's was just horrible shooting the ball. They've been pretty bad shooting the ball the past month or so. They could not make a shot. Bama was giving them wide open shots. They were not playing well defensively. St. Mary's just gave them gifts and missed shots over and over and over again. And Bama just has not looked pretty so far in this tournament. Hasn't looked good defensively. They haven't been their true selves offensively, and they're playing this BYU team who has been red hot and does look great offensively. And I agree with you. I think BYU can pull off this upset. They are my third favorite money line dog to win this week. I think they very well could cover that 5.5, and I think they very well could win this game. And I don't know if Bama has the guys who can stop Saunders. The Bama has to win this game down low. They have to win it at the rim, layups and dunks for them, and make the threes when you take them. That's how Bama wins this game.
Yeah, Alabama has been dealing with the Grant Nelson injury, but they struggled against Robert Morris. Did not look good in that game. Robert Morris had the lead for a little while. St. Mary's were down against Vanderbilt. They came back and won that game, but the shooting for St. Mary's, like you said, has been horrific. Over like the past month, they've had multiple games where they haven't hit a three. Just very, very bad, and could not buy a bucket against Alabama. So Alabama was able to advance very kind of easily, but still they should have looked better, like you said. And now that BYU Bam, I'd say this is my favorite underdog to upset the favorite left in the tournament. But yeah, Alabama just did not look good. They get out of it. They get the wins that they needed to get, but gotta play better defensively and still gotta shoot better than they have at points in the season. So BYU Bama should be a great game, and I like BYU in that one.
Okay, we'll move down to the final region here, the Midwest. We'll start with Houston. They beat the shit out of SIUE in this first round. They did not shoot it well at all, though. They were pretty cold offensively in the second half, to say the least, in that game, as it was Sui who scored 10 points in the final 17 minutes of that game. Gonzaga, they played in the second round. They were beating Gonzaga for most of the game, but they let Gonzaga hang in there. They let them keep it a high single digit game for much of the game. And Gonzaga had every chance to win it at the end. They couldn't hit shots at the very end that would have clinched them that game, but that's a huge win for Houston. We talked about Gonzaga being one of the most underrated high seeds in this entire bracket, one of the top 10 KenPom teams for a lot of the year. They didn't play a ton of tough competition in the WCC. They had some close losses early on in the season. They blew a lead against Kentucky, but Gonzaga loses this game. Houston moves on. They get to play Purdue. Regardless, Jawan Roberts is healthy. Apparently, he wasn't supposed to play until the national championship game, and then he played right out of the gate in the first round. So that kind of changes everything that I had for my pre-bracket going into the tournament. But yeah, they get a matchup versus Purdue that I think is a very favorable matchup for them.
Houston, yeah, I think it's a favorable match for them as well. I think the toughest matchup for them so far going into the Elite Eight will have been Gonzaga, obviously. Gonzaga is a very good team. They were on fire. They beat the brakes off of Georgia. That game wasn't very close at all. They beat them 89-68. They look great going into this Houston matchup, and they really hung in there. And that's a Houston team that I think is very, very good. They haven't lost, I think they've lost one game since November. They ran through the Big 12 regular season and tournament, and they really ran through this bracket so far. That game against Gonzaga was scary. They had the chance to foul up three. They didn't. I believe they got a turnover, got fouled, hit their free throws. So it sets up a matchup with Purdue where I really like Houston in that one, but just dominant so far for Houston against SIUE. And considering I think this Gonzaga team, as well as The 8-9 seeds were honestly probably a better line than the 7-10 seeds, I guess, outside of Arkansas. But you got Gonzaga, Creighton, and UConn as three games that the first round teams had to play in the second round. That's very, very tough. And Gonzaga gave them as much as they could. And for the first time in a long time, they're not in the Sweet 16. So congrats to Houston.
Streak has been broken. We'll move on to Purdue here, the 4 seed in the Midwest. They played High Point in the first round, a popular upset pick from people. Purdue and Matt Painter, we known, have lost to 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 seeds in recent years. They play a 13 seed here in High Point, and they played very well, especially defensively. We were very impressed with Purdue defensively that entire game. And then they play McNeese in the second round. McNeese beats Clemson in the first round. They dominate Clemson. Clemson came back late and gave themselves a chance, but McNeese dominated most of that game with Amir Khan. By the way, the most predictable thing ever was people turning on Amir Khan. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
how it goes. Whenever there's a story and somebody gets hyped up in the media over and over and over again, coupled with there not being a ton of upsets and big storylines in this tournament, the most predictable thing ever was the people turning on Amir Khan. But Purdue manages to beat their boogeyman in the double digit seeds here. They move on to play Houston, which I believe is a pretty brutal matchup for them. Purdue is good offensively. They suck defensively. I think Houston's going to be able to do what they want offensively against Purdue. And I don't know if Purdue, outside of Michigan State, has played a defense that's this aggressive and can get at you and get at your guards as much as Houston's going to. They're going to be able to stop the two-man game with Braden Smith and TKR as much as they can, and Braden first. I I love Houston to move on here. I think if there's one team, if I had to pick one team I'm the most confident in to move on to the Elite Eight from the Sweet 16, I think it would be Houston.
Yeah, I completely agree. Mine would also be Houston. Purdue struggles with those guards, like you said, defense. We saw Michigan State kind of dominate them in that matchup, and Houston's are going to be even more aggressive on this Purdue team. This is the sixth Sweet 16 for Purdue in the last eight tournaments, so they do have that. They do somehow find their way to lose to double-digit seeds, but it's been in the Sweet 16 and on. They are still a team you can kind of count on in March to at least get there. They also have the loss in as the one seed against the 16 seed. That doesn't help, but they have been good overall. They were able to avoid losing to two double-digit seeds in this tournament. They won't play a double-digit seed unless they get to the championship against Arkansas, so they should be good in that aspect. Maybe now they can go on a run, but I like Houston in this matchup. Purdue, they look good against High Point. That was a popular upset pick. They got the job done there. And then against McNeese, they really dominated that game. McNeese wasn't in it after their defense shut down Clemson, especially in that first half. I believe Clemson had less than 20 points. A lot of turnovers, couldn't shoot the ball at all, and was just a real credit to McNeese's defense. They were fantastic, but they could not remake that against Purdue, and Purdue dominated that matchup. So Houston, Purdue, I'm also very confident in Houston. I'd say that's also the team I'm most confident in to advance. So tough matchup for Purdue. We'll see if they can do anything.
Okay, we'll move on to my Kentucky Wildcats, who dominated in their first two games of the NCAA tournament. They beat the shit out of Troy for most of that game, and then Illinois, they came out hot in that Illinois game. They were able to shut down Avicic. They were able to shut down the why can't I remember his name? The guard
Yakachonis?
Yakachonis. They were able to shut down Avicic. They were able to shut down Yakachonis in that game. And when Illinois doesn't shoot it well, they are a brutal team. Kentucky didn't shoot it extremely well either, but the Kentucky defense with Lamont Butler over the past 2 weeks, where he's been healthy since before he got hurt in that Bama game, and now since he's come back after that Bama game, this defense is a completely different defense. They're able to stop you at the point of attack. They're not getting beat off the dribble as much as they were getting beat off the dribble when they didn't have Lamont Butler. And I said going into this tournament, if Lamont Butler can play every game, they're good enough to win the national championship. If he doesn't play every game, that's when they're going to be in trouble. I said a lot on stream going into this Illinois game that I think Illinois was a bad matchup for Kentucky. If they can get past Illinois, Tennessee would be next. I think Tennessee is a great matchup for Kentucky as we've seen them beat Tennessee twice. Lamont Butler, I think, played a total of 10 minutes in those two games. Chaz Lanier shot 29% from the field, 17% from three in those two games without Lamont Butler being in the game. Chaz has been a big reason why Tennessee's been able to get this far in the tournament so far. I think it's a great matchup for Kentucky. I think they beat Tennessee. I think they move on. And in the event that they play Houston or Purdue, I think if they play Houston, it's not a phenomenal matchup ever playing Houston because they're such a good team, but Kentucky has a lot more size down low than Houston. They start two 6'8" big men. Kentucky starts two 7-foot big men and has a 7-footer coming off the bench. So the rebounding opportunities for Kentucky can be there if they can do it. They just have to defend well and shoot at their highest potential. And in the event that Purdue does pull off the upset against Houston, I will predict now if Houston loses to Purdue, Kentucky's going to the Final Four.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see if they would get a matchup with Purdue, but Kentucky's dominated so far, dominated against Troy, easy win there. Illinois versus Xavier. Illinois looked very good in that game. Xavier didn't have too much going and sets up that Illinois-Kentucky matchup where I thought Illinois would have a chance to go out there and win the game, but they would have needed Will Riley to have a big game, Yaka Jones to have a big game, and they really just couldn't get that done. Kentucky's defense, like you said, was very good in that game, and offensively they were great as well. And they set up a rivalry matchup here in the Sweet 16. It's been a while since Kentucky's been in the Sweet 16, so it's good to have them back, but it's going to be a tough matchup against a rival.
Okay, and then our final team here with Tennessee, you have them losing close, or sorry, winning close against Wofford in the first round, and then they play a UCLA team who Mick Cronin has been pissed about the travel all year, and this is another situation where he was pissed about the travel, had to go to the Midwest to play a Tennessee team. They were a 7 seed, so I don't know how picky you can be about that in this situation, but they beat UCLA. They beat them by 9. They were up for most of this game. They weren't great in the first half, but Tennessee pulled away. Both teams pretty stylistically the same, good defensively, aren't going to shoot the lights out offensively. And it sets up this matchup with Kentucky. And I know the cliche thing to say is it's hard to beat a team 3 times, but I think actually historically, at least in football, I think a team who's 2-0 going into their third matchup with a team usually wins that game. So, as much as people do say it's hard to beat a team 3 times, I think historically it's not actually that hard to beat a team 3 times. So, I know Tennessee didn't want to play us in the Sweet 16, but here they are, and it should be the best game of the Sweet 16 in my opinion. And I haven't said who my favorite money line dog is, but at this point, I think you can figure that out.
Yeah, Tennessee played against the UCLA team that looked great in the first round. They dominated Utah State. Wasn't close at all. UCLA wins 72 to 47, held them to less than 50 points. Their defense was great in that game. Their offense got the job done. Sky Clark looked good, and then they go into the second round against Tennessee, and they almost look like Utah State in that UCLA Utah State matchup. They could not score against the Tennessee defense, which has been great all season. Tennessee dominated like with their defense in both of the games, held Wofford to 62 and UCLA to 58. They're going to have another great defensive matchup if they want to beat Kentucky. So it's going to come down to their defense. Will their veterans hit shots? And can Rick Barnes finally get over that hump and find his way into the Elite Eight and maybe the Final Four? So he's choked before. I wouldn't be shocked if he chokes again, but it should be a great matchup against Kentucky, and I'm excited.
Okay, now we'll quickly run through our updated Sweet 16 brackets for the rest of the tournament here, who we have going to the Final Four, who we have winning it all. I will start with mine and then we will do yours. First, Auburn, Michigan. Like I said, I think it's a tough matchup for Auburn with a lot of bigs down low, but I still do think that Auburn gets it done. I think they're too talented of an offensive team, and the law of averages says that Michigan at some point is probably not going to shoot it as well as they've been shooting it over the past couple weeks. So give me them. Ole Miss, Michigan State. I hate to say it, I'm going to take Ole Miss. I'm going to take Ole Miss to pull off the upset. I think they're the hottest team in the tournament right now outside of Duke. They're playing so well offensively. I think Michigan State is a tough matchup for them. So I will say that this is going to be a very, very close game. But Ole Miss is playing so well right now. They're shooting it so well. And unlike Michigan, who's a team that hasn't shot it well that's hot shooting, Ole Miss has shot it well and they're hot shooting. I think that continues. I don't think this is a team that Michigan State wants to get a slow start against, and they've been getting some slow starts. So I think Ole Miss will pull off the upset. Florida, Maryland. I had Maryland going to the Final Four beginning of the tournament. I'm actually going to switch this to Florida. I think Florida is battle tested now that they had this game against UConn and Dan Hurley, a game that they very easily could have lost. Didn't shoot it well, still found a way to win. They're not going to have many games like that in the tournament where they don't shoot it well. I think they shoot it well against Maryland, and I think Florida pulls off the win there. Texas Tech, Arkansas. I'm going to take Tech. I think this is where the run ends for Calipari and the Razorbacks. Texas Tech and JT Toppin have been so great. They have great perimeter defenders. I think they can stifle the momentum that Arkansas has going. We'll move on to the top right, Duke, Arizona. I have Duke winning this game. I think Caleb Love and company can make it close, though, but I feel like this is a situation where Caleb Love gets to forcing it. They're going to need their perimeter defenders like Bryant to be able to stop a guy like Cooper Flag, but Duke has so many guys that I think they will be able to pull off that W. I am still scared about Duke's youth playing so many freshmen, but they have not shown that they are playing like freshmen so far. BYU, Alabama. I'm gonna take BYU to pull off the upset, get another 6 seed in the Elite Eight here. BYU is playing so well offensively. We know how bad Bama is defensively. BYU is going to have to shoot it very poorly to have anywhere under 80 points in this game. And the way that Bama's offense has been, they haven't shot it too well. BYU just seems like a together unit right now, and I think BYU wins this game despite the travel. Moving on to the Midwest, I have Houston beating Purdue. I think they beat the brakes off Purdue. Purdue just is not good enough defensively to stop this Houston team, and I think their two-man game is going to be shut down there. Kentucky, Tennessee, like I said, Kentucky's beaten Tennessee twice without Lamont Butler, who is the key to this defense, the key to make this team a great team. And I don't think they're ready for Lamont Butler on Zakai Ziegler and Otego away on Chaz Lanier, who has not played well against Kentucky. That brings us back into the top left with Auburn, Ole Miss. I have Auburn going to the Final Four still. I still think they're one of the most talented offensive teams here. I think at some point Johni Broome is going to figure it out in this tournament. He has not played well over the first couple games, and they've still been able to roll past Creighton, who I think is a very solid team. Florida, Texas Tech. Going to take the 1 seed Florida to move on, get to the Final Four. I Same situation with Auburn. They haven't shot it extremely well in this tournament so far, especially in that second game, and that's just a matter of time before they get there themselves. East region, I have Duke beating BYU. I still think Duke's the most talented team in this tournament. I still think Cooper Flagg is the best player in this tournament, and Proctor has shot it so well in the first weekend. I think that's going to continue for them, and if Proctor's shooting it well, they're a tough team to beat. Kentucky, Houston. I'm going to stick with Kentucky to beat Houston. The size down low. Two 7-footers against a team that doesn't start anybody over 6'8", doesn't have anybody over 6'8" that plays impactful minutes for them. I do think it's a tough matchup for Kentucky, but this is also, I will stand on Lamont Butler. If Lamont Butler gets hurt in this Tennessee game, they're going to lose to Houston. They might lose to Tennessee if Lamont Butler gets hurt in that game, but I think if he stays healthy, I think they'll be able to get past Houston. Final Four, Auburn, Florida. I'm actually going to take Florida now over Auburn to get to the Final Four. I think their size is too much. I think Auburn has been a little bit struggle. They have been struggling a bit with Chad Baker-Mazara and Johni Broome, and I think Florida just has the shooting and they have the big men to beat a team like Auburn. Duke, Kentucky. I still have Duke beating Kentucky. I think they're a more talented team overall. I think they've been better all year, and at some point, you win 33 out of 36 games. You're just hot and you're used to winning, and regardless of your conference, that just continues on. And then Duke, Florida, still going to take Duke to win the national championship. That hasn't changed. They haven't shown me anything in the first 2 rounds that has shown me anything suspect, while Florida has shown me suspect things in the first 2 rounds. Give me Duke over Florida in my updated Sweet 16 bracket to win it all.
Yeah, the only suspect things Duke has shown so far is it's not them, it's their partners in the ACC have really
Yeah.
didn't have a tournament really at all outside of Duke. But for my bracket, Auburn, Michigan, the Sweet 16, I have Auburn beating Michigan. I think Johni Broome. I think Auburn beating Creighton is going to be very important. I think they can beat this Michigan team. If the other guys don't step up, they should win kind of easily. Ole Miss versus MSU. MSU has got past Jace Richardson having his worst game of the season. They couldn't shoot the ball in that game very well. I think they actually come out and shoot the ball decent in this game. And they can play so many different styles. We have so many different guys. We can play small. We can play big. Do almost we can play almost every style of basketball. I like Michigan State to win that game and set up Auburn, Michigan State, Florida, Maryland. I'm also going to switch to Florida. I Looking at the bracket, there is 7 SEC teams left, a new record. I'd have to have at least one SEC team making a run at this point. I like Maryland a lot. They crab 5. I would not be shocked if they win this, but I think Florida's going to get it done there. Texas Tech, Arkansas. I also think Texas Tech is going to beat Arkansas in a close matchup. I could see Arkansas pulling a shock upset, but I think Texas Tech has too much. They've looked very good so far throughout this tournament. Duke, Arizona. Caleb Love, if he goes off, Arizona can win. I just don't see that happening. Duke has so many guys, 3 top 10 picks. Proctor's been shooting great, like you said. I have Duke winning that. BYU, Bama. I haven't liked what I've seen from Bama so far. They've been inconsistent in this tournament, haven't looked as good as we'd like. And I think BYU's been one of the best teams so far, but maybe we get a shade of BYU, but I like BYU to get it done and set up Duke, Houston, Purdue. I think Houston wins this game pretty easily. And then Kentucky, Tennessee. This is the toughest matchup for me to pick. Um, I go back and forth on it. I had Tennessee originally. I think I'm going to just stick with it. I trust their defense has been good so far through this tournament. I think UCLA is a solid team and they shut them down. Their defense was good. But it would not shock me at all if Kentucky won that game. That's the toughest game in this round for me. To the Elite Eight, Auburn, Michigan State. I still have Michigan State winning and going to the Final Four there. I like Michigan State to get it done. I think they can just play so many different styles. I think they're going to have a better shooting day. I think Jace Richardson's going to have a legacy game, and they're going to be an Auburn team that has been inconsistent so recently and go to the Final Four. Florida, Texas Tech. I'm going to have Florida going to the Final Four over Texas Tech. I need an SEC team. Clayton's shown that he can hit shots in key moments, and I think that's going to be important in both of these games against Maryland and Texas Tech, setting up Michigan State versus Florida in the Final Four. Duke versus BYU. I have Duke winning this game. BYU's been on fire, but Duke hasn't even really played a close game at all. Maybe they'll struggle in a close game, but I like Duke to get to the Final Four. And then Houston, Tennessee. I think Houston's just a way better version of Tennessee. They're better defensively. Right now, they don't have that in any big injuries right now that can hinder their potential. So I like them to just continue to dominate. To the Final Four, Michigan State, Florida. It would be very wild if it was Michigan State, Texas Tech, as that's exactly what we saw in 2019, and both 2 and 3 seeds in the same spot. But it's Michigan State versus Florida is what I have, and I have Michigan State winning that game. I think playing in a big dome can hurt shooting. We've seen it before. And with Walter Clayton being a shooter, Michigan State doesn't rely on the shooting as much. They're a very good defensive team. I think they can shut down Florida and find themselves in the championship game. Duke versus Houston, I have Duke winning it. I think they just have so much talent. Cooper Flag's huge. And like you said about Houston not having a guy over 6'8", that could be big. Duke's got a lot of big guys. They're so athletic. Setting up a championship game of Michigan State versus Duke, where I still have Duke being my national champion. They haven't shown me anything, like you said, to change that. They've been dominant all tournaments so far, and the only thing that concerns me is that the ACC hasn't been good, but Duke's been fantastic, and I'm just gonna continue with it.
Yeah, I'm realizing that it's so easy to pick against your team in a hypothetical matchup, one that we don't have like set in stone yet. Because I know for a fact that if it's Duke, Michigan State in the final, and we're talking right before the final, you'd pick Michigan State if once the matchup's set in stone. And I know for a fact if it's Duke, Kentucky in the Final Four, right before the Final Four, I'm gonna pick Kentucky. It's easier to say, oh yeah, they'll lose down the road, but once the matchup's in front of you, there's no way I'm gonna actually pick against them in the
Yeah,
set
I
in
wouldn't
stone
pick
matchup.
against them,
Yeah, there's just no chance. But
but Duke has a lot more talent than Michigan State.
yeah, that'll
Power of
about
friendship.
what was that?
Power of friendship.
Power of friendship. Yeah. That'll about do it for this episode of the Engage 8 podcast. We will be back next week to talk about the Final Four, which is crazy that we'll have the Final Four in front of us next week, but we will, and we'll break down the Final Four in the national title games. And then we're getting into draft season, so look out for our draft predictions coming up soon. Some mock drafts on the way. Hit all the links in our description for TikTok, Spotify, social media. We've been doing a ton of stuff on TikTok. We're doing lives on TikTok now. So hop into those. We have a good time just talking ball on there. Also, Answer 8, Episode 3 is out on the channel right now. So go ahead and check that one out as well. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and we will see everyone in the next one.